We are now back in session. We are now under item 10, general public comments. There will be a 2-minute time limit. The light on the podium will be green for the first minute and a half, then the bell will ring and the light will turn yellow, indicating you have 30 seconds remaining. At the 2-minute time limit, the bell will turn red, indicating your time has expired. Please respect your time, your 2 minutes, and we will begin with our first speaker, Julian Silva, Don Schrader, Stephen Overman, Keith Calgon, E. Ward. If your name has been called, please come to the front and be prepared to speak. Julian Silva. Looks like Julian may have left the building. Don Schrader. Steve Overman. Sir. Welcome.
Council members, I see my councilman is gone. Is he, Mr. Davis, you back here, do you know? Okay. Well, my comments were going to be directed towards him too, so could I?
Would you like to wait until he
Yes,
gets
could I
back?
wait
Okay,
till he
that'd be
shows up,
fine.
please? Thank you.
Thank you. Keith Kagan. E. Ward. Welcome. You want to give her a hand?
President
Proceed.
Sanchez, councilors. My comments are directed toward the IDO. And I did an analysis of the ABC to Z team responses to public comments on the IDO and reviewed, or looked at the published comments, the comment matrix that were published online. This is just so you can see what it looked like. And there were 1,879 comments from 140 commenters. And I wanted to try to answer 3 different questions. Was there a difference in the likelihood of a positive response or request to request a comment depending on whether a person making the comment represented a neighborhood, a commercial, governmental, or agency interest? And was there any difference in the likelihood of receiving no explanation or no change in discussion? And was there any difference in the likelihood of a positive response, that is, change or discussion, set off by a concurrent negative response? Basically, it's looking at, in the comment, like, all I did was look at the data of basically the 2 columns of whether a comment received no change or change. And these were published, and I just want to get to results quickly. The groups were divided into neighborhood, commercial, governmental agency, and independent or determinate. These were the numbers of the different comments. And then a chi-square, I won't go into the statistics, but basically the results showed that commercial and governmental agency commenters were twice as likely to get a positive response to a comment than a neighborhood commenter. And the odds ratios were basically 2 to 1 for commercial over neighborhood and governmental over neighborhood. And then I looked to see if, for all of the negative responses, oh, that was
Thank you, Ms.
fast.
Ward.
Okay. Well, you all have this. Thank you.
Shakir Farid Abdullah, followed by Surah Al-Zaidi, followed by Fadi Al-Zaidi.
want to get like paragraphs 5, this paragraph right here. Alright, and then this is for them. These are copies for all of them. Alright, what's up, Pat? Good evening, President and Albuquerque City Council. My name is Shakir Farid Abdullah, and I'm coming forward to you as a very concerned citizen of our multicultural and diverse communities. What you see on here is this affidavit that I'm going to continuously be bringing to you, because APD can go into the evidence locker room, remanufacture narcotics, and sell them on the streets in these reverse drug stings. Now, I've heard Mr. Benton, I've heard Mrs. Borrego, I've heard fellow other council members talk about, accountability and also upholding APD, upholding the law regarding the regarding immigrant status right here. Like I was seeing you speak what about APD being able to carry out their stuff and the justice in that, right? That our community justly deserves, our law enforcement being 100% accountable and working with us and us working with them. But how can we work with them if they're selling this dope on our streets? And when they sell these dopes on the street, it creates a frenzy. There's a big time butterfly effect in it with just 1 gram of methamphetamines. But in December 2017, in the year of 2017, they lost 5 pounds of meth. And this affidavit was supposed to be ended in December 2016. They're poisoning our people, and I'm seeing how APD is heralded in this city council, but that's not the case when they can sell dope to our people on the streets. I'm working with kids who've been raped, and they deal with it and they compensate with it, and their coping mechanisms is this very same meth. I had a girl who was molested by her father. She died last year on an overdose of heroin. And how do I know this heroin didn't come from APD? And how much are they cutting it? Because they could test this, do a field unit test on these drugs before they disperse it to our people. These are your citizens. These are people you're supposed to be looking for, and we have APD. You're trying to bring us with them?
Your time has expired. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr.
I'll be back again.
Councilor Davis.
Thank you. Ms. Nair, can you help me with this very briefly? I realize that this was something that was occurring at APD before your administration took over. You and I had a conversation about this before y'all took office, and APD gave us some assurances that they had seen the error of their ways, perhaps, and we're not doing this type of operation anymore, and it was targeting the international district. But is there any way you can help us maybe report back at the next council meeting to assure or give us a status on APD status on this type of operation that was conducted? And if you have policies that prohibit it, or how APD is addressing future concerns like this.
Council President Sanchez, first, Councilor Pena, we did find out the status of those officers from the rollover, and they do appear to be fine. So that's good news. To your question, Councilor Davis, yes, I'd be happy to look into that and report back at the next meeting.
Let's go back to Steve Overman.
Council members, my name is Steve Overman. I've been a resident of Albuquerque in District 6 for the past 35 years. All right. I'm also a retired military veteran with 40 years of service. I've been a member of the City of Albuquerque's Veterans Military Affairs and Advisory Board for the past 6 years. In fact, Councilman Sanchez, if you remember last December, I had a meeting with you and several other board members over some issues with the Veterans Board. For the entire time that I've been a member of this board, I first worked with Eleanor Reiners and now Fermin Ortega of the Veterans Integration Center in trying to acquire a permanent location for the VIC. Currently, there is a plot of city land owned within District 6. The northern boundary is Ross Avenue Southeast. The southern boundary is Eastern Avenue Southeast. The western boundary is Palomas Drive Southeast, and the eastern boundary is Alvarado Drive Southeast. Okay? This location has been sitting vacant for many years and has languished through the city's bureaucratic process for the past 6 years or more that I'm aware of, since I've been on the board for 6 years. Due to the proximity of this location to the Veterans Administration Hospital, this is an ideal location for the VIC to build the facilities needed to address the City of Albuquerque's homeless veterans issue. Currently, the City of Albuquerque is spending numerous dollars and city employee resources in addressing the civilian homeless population that is present within the boundaries. I firmly believe that the city needs to reprioritize this issue and focus on the homeless vet issue. I strongly urge the council, and particularly you, Councilman Davis, to exert your influence and ability to address and expedite this plot of land issue. This will allow the VIC to participate in the RFP process in order that they can acquire this land and build the facility that are needed to take care of our homeless veteran situation within the city ASAP. I thank you for your time in listening to my appeal, and your consideration in granting this request will be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Councilor Davis?
Mr. President, and thank you very much for doing that. And I think we have a report back to your board coming up at their next meeting. I've been meeting with the board chair, Mr. Powell, for a couple of months now in moving that process forward. And that site's not available for us because of some flood issues, but we've been looking at an alternative site, and we met about it last week and are waiting on a public input process for that, so I look forward to
If I may
hearing
be
from you.
given the time, sir, I have some artist drawings
Yes, sir.
that were given to me by Eleanor Irons about 3 years ago
Yes, sir.
involving that situation, involving that.
Yes, sir, and we've have them, and we've worked through it, and I met with the board, some of the board members last week for lunch, and we worked through how to accommodate that and see if we can find some alternative spaces, and we have some solutions. So we have a report back at your board, and I'm happy to come visit with y'all and let's talk about
Well, are you
it.
talking about the Veterans Advisory Board, or are you talking about the VIC?
The VIC.
Okay, well, I'm not a member of the VIC.
Yeah.
I'm a member of the Military
Yes, sir.
Advisory Board. I work closely with the
Yes,
VIC,
sir.
and as I said, for 6 years.
Thank you. We appreciate that. I think we're making progress there finally after 3 years, and I appreciate your advocacy. It's very important, and thanks for your service on
Thank
that
you.
board, too.
Overman, thank you. Next speaker is Surah Al-Zaidi, followed by Fadi Al-Zaidi, followed by Joe Williams, and the last speaker will be Simon Polakowski.
Good evening, councilors and council president. I know that there now is an RFP for the management of public access channels 26, 27, and educational channel 96. I believe that when the old management was managing 26 and 27, they were using 519 Central. I would recommend that whoever's in charge of giving out the contract next, go to 519 and look over the facilities. I do not believe that these facilities are a very good place for public access, for a teaching place. It's a 2-story building, no elevator, terrible stairs. People with, I recommend maybe the committee that advises the city on ADA, go and look it over. I think, you know, it's really a shame. Maybe think about another place, more accessible to everyone, people with disabilities, and, you know, sell it off, this building. It's part of a building, actually, downtown. It's no parking. Why the city prior administration spent $700,000 on it is very questionable. So I think this should be part of the RFP, that whoever is going to bid on this RFP, please look over the facilities that the city is offering, because they need to know what they're getting into, because in order to have a real public access station, you must have access for everyone, not just the ground floor of a, you know, storefront. So again, I'd really like to emphasize that. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the general public comments. And item 10, we are now under item 11, which is announcements. Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. There will be an Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority meeting on Wednesday, April 18th at 5 p.m. in the Vincent E. Griego Chambers.
Thank you, Councilor Jones. Councilor Benton.
There will be an Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Government Commission meeting on Thursday, April 26th at 5 p.m. in these Vincent E. Griego chambers.
Thank you, Councilor Benton. We are now on item 12, which is public hearings, and this is item A. AC Ford, Cherry Hills Civic Association appeals the decision of the Environmental Planning Commission, and I will turn this over to Mr. Melendres to explain this appeal.
Thank you, Mr. President, councilors. The issue in this appeal is whether or not the Environmental Planning Commission erred in approving a zone map amendment from SU1 for church-related facilities to SU1 for a senior living facility and an associated site development plan for subdivision and site development plan for building permit. A neighboring neighborhood association, the Cherry Hills Civic Association, appealed this matter to the City Council arguing that the EPC erred in several of its findings relative to land use policies and that it otherwise erred in its consideration of the matter. This matter was referred to the land use hearing officer, who recommends that the decision of the EPC be affirmed and that the zone map amendment and associated site plans be approved. This is the second time this matter has come before council. The first time the city council remanded it to the Environmental Planning Commission for it to fix a procedural error and to clarify some of its findings. The specific site is approximately 14.2 acres. It's on the north side of the Albuquerque Academy site. The zoning at this 14-acre site has been in effect since 1985, and the site has remained undeveloped since then. The church is requesting this zone change to allow a senior living facility at this location. The LUHO reviewed the EPC's decision and determined that their decision was supported by the record and the findings, by finding that the existing zoning is inappropriate, given, to quote the LUHO, the remarkably narrow allowances within that zoning, and also from evidence from the church that was submitted that the church has basically grown to its peak capacity and size and that'll never expand onto this property. There was also a study that was submitted into the record that talked about the demographics in this area needing greater assisted living and elder living type of facilities in the area. Those, together with policies of the comprehensive plan, which would be furthered by this, were the basis for the EPC's decision to approve this matter. The EPC made 25 findings about the advancement of policies within the comprehensive plan. For those reasons, the EPC approved the matter. The LUHO reviewed and determined that the EPC's decision was supported by facts and evidence and recommends that the appeal be denied. You're considering tonight whether to accept or reject the recommendation of your land use hearing officer. You won't hear from the parties tonight. If you have questions, I'll do my best to answer those from the material in the record. If we cannot get a vote to accept this matter tonight, we'll schedule it for a full hearing at a subsequent council meeting.
Are there any questions from this council? Councilor Winter.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do have quite a few questions, but I'll try to make it quick. Mr. Melendres, so this has been to the council twice. It was sent back. Explain, first of all, let me go through what the process is. First of all, to make a zone change, it has to be determined that the existing zoning is inappropriate. Is that correct?
Mr. President, Councilor Winter, that's correct.
So in this case, how was the existing zoning that it was inappropriate? How did that come back? Where was that testimony from?
Mr. President, Councilor Winter, so to just restate the requirement from the council's resolution that describes the requirements for zone map amendments, R270-1980, says that a finding has to be made that the existing zoning is inappropriate at the site and that changed conditions justify the change, that there was a mistake in the original zoning, or that the proposed zoning would be more advantageous as articulated by the comprehensive plan. So with respect to the inappropriateness of the zoning at the site, the EPC looked at the length of vacancy at the site. They looked at the testimony of the church pastor, which was unrebutted at this time, that in 1985, the church secured this zoning for approximately 500,000 square feet of floor area for their facility. 33 years later, the church has developed with approximately 170,000 square feet and some ancillary uses such as a soccer field and some open space uses. And this 14-acre parcel will essentially never be used within the scope of the zoning, which is limited to a church-related facility. That, coupled with the changing demographics in the area, the EPC came to the conclusion that the zoning was inappropriate at the site because it
Yeah, and I'll get to that. But so they took the testimony of the pastor, and so on his testimony, then they made that decision. If that was the only testimony they received?
Mr. President, Councilor Winter, the basis for, the assertion was that the church wasn't going to grow. That was based on the assertions of the leadership of the church.
Okay, so when the zoning was changed to church in 1985, so they came and said they're going to build a church for 500,000 square feet. And I think, so, and we have neighbors around that area, so they have, basically, when that was changed, this is what was brought, that this was going to be a church. So then now, so the church didn't ever materialize to be this mega church that they wanted to be, so they only built 170,000 square feet. And so then this is when the change came. And I know that, can you explain what the market study, so that's been part of this. So tell me what the market study was done and who did that market study?
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilor Harris, the market study, there's some history to the market study, and that it wasn't introduced in the record the first time that this came before the council. And that was one of the reasons for the remand, is because you needed that evidence to be able to look at. The market study discussed the changing demographics in the area and the need for senior housing. And I'm going to dig through the record to find that study. It begins
Mr.
on,
Melendres, and who did that study?
it begins on page 177 of the record, and it was performed by a company called SR. The company is JLL. I'm finding their initials on the material.
Okay, Mr. Melendres, one more question. Was this commissioned by the developer or by the church or the city?
Mr. President, this was commissioned by, Councilor Harris, this was commissioned by the proponents of the project. So the church, likely in conjunction with the developers of the assisted living facility.
So can you basically say what the study said?
Yes, Mr. President, Councilor Winter, I apologize for that a couple of times there. So the study looked at the demographics in the area. They looked at the demographics in the city and the demographics within a 3-mile radius of the site. And they identified that the largest demographic group, at least by age, was within the age group of 65 to 85. And that within that area, there were not the facilities available to accommodate that demographic, essentially for aging in place effectively. And so based on that, they identified the demand in the area for potential senior housing and the absence of community housing resource to accommodate that demand.
So then, Mr. Melendres, then goes to the next step. So then either they have to determine change condition or the zone change being more advantageous, or there was a mistake made. So they decided to go with this, saying that this is more advantageous to the community, correct?
Mr. President, Councilor Winter, yes, and also citing some policies of the comprehensive plan.
So, gosh, councilors, I've been on this council a long time, and when I talk about, we always, 1972-80 is a great thing, but when you talk about advantageous to the community, I think you also put in neighborhood associations with that. And as I read the record and talk to Mr. Melendres, this more advantageous goes directly to the comp plan and what the comp plan says. And that's when the decision was made, correct?
Mr. President, Councilor Harris, correct. I'm sorry, Councilor
That's
Winter,
okay.
that's correct, out of the policies of the comp plan.
Okay, let me just tell you some of the issues that I have, is that, and I think Cherry Hills is the one who filed the protest, and then you have the proponents are making a study saying that, we need more senior care. 1985, the zone was changed, and in that time, there's been, people live because of what certain zoning is. And so 1985, you had already existing houses in that neighborhood, correct? And then you had new houses that came in the neighborhood. Is that correct?
Mr. President, Councilor Winter, that's correct.
So you have these issues about, and I know that zoning changes, but the church came in and said they were going to be a mega church, so they were going to build 500,000 square feet of church. It didn't work out that way. And now it kind of is pitting the neighborhoods against the church, and they're trying to change the zone to put a different condition in there. The market study was done, and I know 3 or 4 close to where I live, which is that there's senior living facilities. Palomas has a couple senior living facilities there. And so we're making a decision based on what one person said, that we need a zone change, and that would be the pastor. And then we have a study. And I'm telling you, I just think when you're looking at more advantage of the community, you have to look at neighborhoods too. So I would like to move to reject and at least have a hearing so the folks can at least explain what went on. And I know it's been a long process, but I don't know if I'll get a second or not, but. So
We have a motion, any second on the floor?
So I'll let someone else speak now.
Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I understand perfectly what Councilor Winter is saying, but I also remember maybe 30 years ago when there was a vacant, the entire piece of property just on the south side of the Hoffmantown Church, but across Academy, the southeast corner of Academy and Wyoming. That piece of land that needed a zone change to build was tied up in court for well over 5 years because the neighbors thought it would not be advantageous to them. Although in the same situation, there were neighbors across the street, but not neighbors. The otherwise was church and nothing on the further side of it. But it was held up in court, long court battle. And then the courts decided that the developer was correct and they could build that. That now holds a bagel shop, a Dion's Pizza, one of the busiest in the city, various and sundry other things, a Petco or Pet something, big, giant pet store. And lo and behold, it also has a Walmart, which was what the community was fighting because they didn't like Walmarts. But in fact, that is one of the most used centers in our part of the city, and that is very close to my district, across the street from my district also. So I believe that many of us fear change, especially if we consider it to be in our backyard, when in fact, in this case, the protesting group, their backyard is across a street from this and a little ways away, and surrounded by, I believe, a 6-foot block wall, which means there would be very little effect from, for heaven's sakes, a senior living, which you will find all up and down Academy, and they're full. They're very, very well occupied. This is what's happening in this area of the city. Unfortunately, we are getting older, or fortunately, we're getting older because the other option isn't great. But they are good neighbors. There's very little traffic. One of the biggest detriments that I see to the neighborhood, and I'm sorry, Councilor Winter, but is they would no longer have that piece of land as their own private open space to walk their dogs. And that is not a reason to reject private property. If this neighborhood considers that to be inappropriate for their neighborhood because they want to keep it for their dog park, they need to pool their funds and buy it, and they can keep it for their open space dog park for the rest of their lives. But I do not agree this is something we should hold up any longer. The reports that came in on this, all the different policies that we see and what's going on, this has gone through it's gone through EPC twice, it's gone to LUHO twice. It is very, very well thought out and comfortable, and I cannot support bringing this in front of the entire council. One of the reasons is I don't mind if the council hears it, but we have tied the people up, the people who put up the money or the people who are trying to sell, and the church needs the money. I'm very familiar with the church. They are no longer a quasi-mega church. Their attendance is down, therefore their income is down, therefore they can't afford to build a bigger church and probably won't, where their population is an aging population. So they might want to walk behind their space and go live there. But I personally cannot support this, Councilor Winter, and I see where you're coming from, but I apologize. This is, I believe that the neighborhood has had ample opportunity to protest this. They have had ample hearings. They have had ample opportunity to speak and try to do something different. And in my opinion, this is a very, very good use for this piece of property. One of the major reasons, because one of the things that I read in the very beginning was the neighbors didn't want the senior living because it would create too much traffic. Well, I gotta tell you, I would rather have a senior living across the street from me than a mega church. So that's population, and every one of them, 2 people per car, hundreds of them. So I'm sorry, Councilor Winter, I can't accept, I cannot vote in favor of your motion.
Councilor Borrego.
Mr. Melendres, and I drive through here all the time, but I cannot remember, is there a telecommunications facility at this site existing?
Mr. President, Councilor Borrego, the record indicates that in 1997, the zoning was amended slightly to allow telecommunications facilities at this site, but they were to be incorporated architecturally into the church structure. So the record does not indicate that there are freestanding structures, but that they're incorporated into the structures at the site.
Well, the reason I ask that question is because usually telecommunications antennas are part of a network. And I worked on telecommunications forever. So I know, that network exists, and in order to amend it, it seems like this is just, was there a part of a record in the EPC? Since I'm new, I don't know if the EPC discussion discussed that network or the telecommunications part of
Mr. President,
this?
Councilor Borrego, let me just kind of clarify the 62-acre site has the authorization for church uses and telecommunication sites. The 14-acre site that is being the subject of this particular zone map amendment is completely vacant. Anything that is done on this property will not impact any existing uses, telecommunication or otherwise.
It was never built, it sounds like then.
Correct.
Okay. All right, I just needed to know that. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? We have a motion and a second on the floor to reject the Lou Ho's recommendation and set a full hearing before this council. All those in favor signify by saying yes and raise your hand. Yes. Those opposed? No. That carries, that fails on a 3-6 vote.
Mr. President,
Councilor Jones.
I'd like to make a motion to accept the Lou Ho's recommendations and findings.
We have a motion and a second by Council Vice President Harris. Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, and that's including the recommendations and findings, correct? All those in favor signify by saying yes. 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 Those opposed? No. That carries on a 8-1 vote. Okay, we are now on approvals. There is none this evening. And we are now under final action, item 14B, and that is Councilor Pena, R-26.
Thank you, Mr. President. R26 is reserving council project funds to provide for community arts project related to the history and culture of the Trisco area of the city of Albuquerque. This is, actually this project went through internal ops, and just to refresh everyone's memory, I'm just taking another stab at it because I think it's an important project, looking at some of the projects that we've funded through the city. I just want to really try to create some diversity and really bring some of these art programs to the southwest area of the city and really tracking history. I know Councilor Benton gave some tapes in terms of the history of Atrisco Southwest, which is important. And anyway, so last year's budget, we put it through. We had some additional projects that were new projects that each of the councilors had submitted. And there was a recommendation to go through these projects and make sure that they were viable, and so we did that, and we separated them from the other items in the budget. It went in front of internal ops. Well, actually, yeah, it went in front of internal ops. I actually neglected to invite the folks to attend that particular meeting, and all the projects went through at the allotted amount, and I don't remember exactly what that amount was, but it was, in addition to that, it was decreased. All the projects were decreased by a certain percentage to allow for another project, I think, that Councilor Benton had introduced. And those had all passed, and they all had a variety of funding sources. Some of them had in-kind, some of them didn't have any funding. And these particular projects that I have, I know there was some question at internal ops about them not having additional funding other than some in-kind dollars associated with it. But there were other projects that we had approved at the time that didn't have other than in-kind associated with it as well. So, I just really think they're important projects to our community. Arte Escondido is about discovering hidden artists in our community, artists that really can't afford to be part of shows, and so we can give them an avenue on how to figure out how to go through the process of becoming part of this. And then the other one is the history of the Atrisco land grant. And that's something that, I mean, obviously, there's not, this is a small amount of money, and we're not going to be able to document the whole history, but working with Tony de la Flora, he really has a real good knowledge of the history, and he's tracked a lot of things that have happened in the area in terms of the community work, in terms of other issues that have with the Atrisco land grant and other people that he's worked with. So he has a lot of information that he can already put together to do this history. So, again, I would urge your support. I'm taking another stab at this. Like I said, I really feel that it's a very important project in the community, so.
Mr. Chair.
You want to move that?
Yes, did I? I'm sorry.
We have a motion
Motion to.
and a second by
to approve.
Councilor Borrego. We will go to Councilor Harris.
Thank you. I think this is terribly, terribly important for us to vote against this. Let me tell you why. There's only been a couple, Stephanie Yara did an analysis of all the projects that we've funded through the internal ops, and there's been a couple where essentially all the funding was by the city council internal ops in terms of and there wasn't really any other funding from nonprofits, or there wasn't any privately raised money, or there wasn't any funding from other agencies or other endowments, whatever. And I think it's really sets a bad precedent with a lot of nonprofits. I think a lot of the councilors up here know people who are involved in those communities. And we support nonprofits where we happen to know what the nonprofit is doing. And in almost all the cases, the city is providing a gap in the funding. But here, where virtually all of the money is going to go to one person who the counselor happens to know, I think is something that we just can't allow. We got to stop this. We can't do it again. We might have done it once or twice before, but we can't. I mean, this council money, for the sake of the public, I think we need the people to come to us and show that you're viable. And how you show you're viable is that other people think you're viable, not just somebody that you know because you like, or one particular council or likes what is going on, and so they're going to spend $16,000 of funding, which is going to go into the pocket of somebody, and I just don't think that's the way we should do business.
Councilor Borrego.
Mr. Chair, councilors, I'm supporting this because I think that it's important that we document our history. And this particular area of Atrisco is one of the areas where, our history began in Albuquerque besides Old Town. And we worked on a similar project in the Barelas neighborhood, I think it was in the 90s. And we worked with the UNM Hispanic, I can't remember exactly, heritage group, and I would see this almost as a way to embark on maybe some joint funding, and maybe, and if it doesn't work out, Councilor Pena, maybe, you come back and we put this money back in. But I think that it's really important that we start documenting our history in various ways, and art is one of those ways. Also, oral history programs. I mean, there's a number of, areas that we need to preserve that history. So I really think that it's important for us. And we talked about diversity earlier, and I think that, we look at diversity also from an artistic standpoint. And also, I would like to see that this be supported.
Thank you. We've got Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have been a member of the Internal Operations Committee for quite some time, and one of the things that we were noticing, of course, is that we are getting more and more requests for non-participatory funding. And if we see projects such as this, which I believe probably has a very good purpose for the city of Albuquerque, but if it isn't important enough for the people bringing it forward to actually get some financial help or in-kind contributions or some kind of help on this. This isn't the kind of project, albeit it's very small. This isn't a big amount of money in the way we put out money, but it's the idea that the rules should apply the same for everyone. And we did stop some projects before because they did not have, we said, this doesn't work. We need to see a budget. We need to see where the money is coming from, other from the city of Albuquerque. And a project this size, or projects this size, I can't believe that if it's this important to the community, that they wouldn't be able to participate in many ways. Sweat equity, bake sales. I mean, this is what people do when they want something this bad about their community. You don't go to a governmental body to fund something that is a community project. So, Councilor Pena, I see there's a very good purpose for this and a need for this, but I do not believe, first of all, that it should come before the entire city council. I believe this is something, the reason we have the Internal Operations Committee, and those rules we've pretty much refined so we get the information that we need to make an informed decision. So I can't support this, I'm sorry.
Councilor Benton?
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I did vote against this in internal ops, and I guess I'll just say the same thing again. I do agree with the points made by Councilor Harris and Jones, which I believe, Councilor Jones, you heard some of this presentation, but you had to leave before voting. Let me just speak about the Atrisco community heritage, and I'll say the same thing I said in internal ops. I do agree it's a small amount, and I'm not sure it's enough to do justice to this project. Also, I should point out that Mr. De La Flora did some of these previous similar, almost exactly the same type of model of video program using the GovTV budget under Cultural Services Department. So, you know, this seems to be the kind of thing that I agree we should have partners. We did check, and with the National Hispanic Cultural Center, they do have quite a bit of documentation, albeit it's not in video form or digital form, but they do have a history of Atrisco. And it was mentioned that UNM is another great resource for something like this. So my sense on both of these was they were not fully baked. You know, there was a rudimentary budget presented with some in kind, but the bulk of it was, as Councilor Harris said, in both cases, two different individuals, but you know, one individual being paid for the bulk of each of these projects. So I'll not be able to support it tonight either.
And I'd like to make a couple of comments. I will be supporting this. I have also sat on the Internal Ops Committee for many years, and a lot of projects that didn't live up to this magnitude with the projects that we are looking at tonight did get funding. I just feel that this is important to the history and the culture and the heritage of Atrisco. And when we talk about artists in the South Valley and across the city, I believe these artists should have every opportunity and every chance to be able to shine and to show their talents off throughout this community. And if, you know, they do well, they can, you know, expand on that. But I just think these are, you know, $32,000 and $16,000 appropriation out of Fund 305 is not asking for a lot of money from the taxpayers of this community, because I believe that the value that we will receive from these two projects will be of great benefit to our community. And I just believe that this is important, and I will support it. Councilor Pena to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to ask, memory in terms of the process that had occurred last year during the budget, because, you know, I understand what folks are talking about in terms of the projects, because Mr. Councilor Harris, you know, when he talks about setting precedents, I mean, the precedence was set when we voted on the initial budget with all these other 14 projects, and within these projects that we voted on, there were at least 3 projects that were very similar with the types of funding that these two projects that I'm requesting. The only reason, I mean, when it was voted on internal ops last time, when you had the 14 or so different projects that were voted on, it was pretty much, there was not a lot of scrutiny given to those projects. It was kind of like, this is the amount of money we have, these are the projects, this is what we're going to do. Obviously, as Councilor Jones stated, it was kind of like, you know, here we're bringing new programs in, and when people come to, small nonprofits come to City Council and ask for dollars, these are nonprofits that are coming to us because you're right, they don't have the capacity, they're not large nonprofits that can go through an RFP process. They're community-based projects, they're coming in and asking for a little bit of funding to help them do some community-based initiatives. And when we say, you know, and Councilor Harris, I just want to, for the record, say that I take offense to saying that I know someone. I mean, that's implying something that I think is not right. We know a lot of people that we fund for different, whole host of programs that we have in our community. We know them, you know. So to say, I think that's, it just sets a bad tone. So, Mr. Zaman, can you kind of refresh our memory in terms of that and how it was?
How the funding came about and how it got into Fund 305. Yes, ma'am. Last year during the budget process, the council had made requests that were incorporated into the council's floor substitute for the FY18 budget. Of the programs that had been added, there were approximately, if memory serves, $300,000 worth of projects that represented either new programs that the council wanted to fund or programs that had received increased dollar amounts. And I believe Councilor Benton, during the budget markup, had offered an amendment that swept the funding for all of those either new projects or increased dollar projects out of the budget bill itself and sent them to Fund 305 council projects, with some language that said that these projects are to be further vetted by the city's internal, by the council's internal operations committee to determine whether they should be funded and at what level. And so that's how the money was initially put into the budget, swept into Fund 305, and eventually got in front of the council internal ops committee.
Thank you, Mr. Zaman. And so when it went in front of internal ops, as I stated earlier, all projects pretty much weren't put under the same scrutiny that these two projects are being put under, and they passed. And of course, the concerns that Councilor Jones mentioned was about, you know, we just want to make sure that we're not just an avenue for these dollars to be going in and out, and we want to make sure that if they do come back or they've looked at other sources for funding. So I do agree with that, but like I said, if I had just notified these folks to be there the night of that meeting, it seems as though those two additional projects would have passed. There was also the instance where I think it was reduced to allow for another project, and then, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. President, Councilor Pena. Yeah, I believe that a couple of projects, in addition to the ones that were swept into 305 during the budget, were added. And as a result of the internal ops committee funding those projects, all of the other project amounts were reduced by, I think it was 21%.
Thank you, Mr. Zaman. So again, I'll just close by saying that, you know, I think these are really small amounts in terms of community-based projects. I think they're important, obviously, as Councilor Benton says, is that, you know, obviously that's not enough money and there's other work that has been done. They're projects that have been important, people in the community are looking forward to, and that's why I've been real insistent on trying to get the funding for these two projects. So, thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second on the floor for approval of R-26. All those in favor, raise your hand and say yes. Yes. Those opposed? No. That fails on a 3-6 vote. If there is no further business before this council, this meeting is adjourned.